Week 7 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receivers in the tier list format I give you guys every week, along with a pick'em entry based off some of my favorite projections over on Underdog Fantasy. But before we get into the tier list, before we get into the pick'em, we go through the will they play tier. And the will they play tier this week is absolutely filled to the rim with a ton of skepticism. We don't really know what's going on, but I'll try my best to guide you guys through it. Some of the guys we already anticipated would be out, Puka Nacua, Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson, all confirmed out or are listed heavily doubtful in this game. The one update I do have for you guys as I'm recording this video is Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders was ruled out for this game against the Dallas Cowboys with the heel injury he aggravated this week. So if you have Deebo Samuel, typically it would be, a top 10, top 15 level wide receiver option. You will be without him this week as per Adam Schefter. And the other quote we did get from Adam Schefter in regards to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers is that both Emeka Egbuka and Mike Evans are listed as game time decisions. Again, keep that in mind. Tampa Bay, they do play on Monday Night Football against the Detroit Lions. So if you are planning on having Emeka Egbuka in your lineup, on having Mike Evans in your lineup, make sure you have a pivot option. Whether it's a Tez Johnson, a Cade Otton, a Cameron Johnson, pick your flavor from that wide receiver core in Tampa, but just keep in mind, if you do have Mike Evans, if you do have Emeka Egbuka, make sure you do have a pivot because, of course, their upside is good enough to be able to hold out. And then finally, Jakobi Meyers, according to this tweet from Deepak, he is expected, based on the data, about a 55% chance of playing in this game. Regardless, though, tough matchup against the Chiefs. Jakobi himself hasn't been playing well these last few weeks. With Jakobi Meyers, I would prefer to sit him if you have the luxury to be able to do so. And then there are two teams on bye week this week, the Baltimore Ravens, the Buffalo Bills. Just a precaution, if you had Zay Flowers in your lineup, Rashad Bateman, etc., I'm sure you would have noticed by now, but make sure they are not in your lineup entering week 7. But now we move on to the official top 40 tier list. Starting at the top, tier 1, two names consist of this tier: Amon St. Brown and Jackson Smith-Njigba. This tier is titled the 20-point per gamers. As you guys can see with Amon-Ra, 21 points per game this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba up at 21.4. I do have Amon St. Brown as my number 1 wide receiver this week. Of course, we'll talk about the matchup with JSN in a second. But when it comes to the matchup for Amon St. Brown, you can't get much better than this Tampa Bay matchup here. Second highest game total of the slate with the Sharps slamming the over in this game. And with Amon St. Brown himself, he has scored 18 plus points in 4 of his 6 games this year. It's pretty simple. Amon St. Brown is one of the safest projections on a week-to-week basis. He has had 7 plus receptions in his last 5 games for the Detroit Lions. It's clear, with the Buccaneers being a pass funnel defense, the Detroit Lions will absolutely feed their pass game engine in this game. And then the other wide receiver in this tier, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Again, I gave the tiebreaker to Amon St. Brown, very favorable matchup. Whereas with JSN, a less than ideal matchup going up against the Texans, as we see with the game environment, over-under at 41, 13th of the slate. We do have the Sharps hammering the over, but at the same time here, a 41 over-under, a 22-point implied total at home, not the greatest environment when it comes to JSN. On top of that, when you combine that with the fact that Derek Stingley should potentially shadow him in this game, you do have a slight downtick in regards to when you're comparing him to Amon-Ra. But JSN, no real issues. He's one of the best wide receivers in the league this year. 79 plus receiving yards in every single game. And like I said, he's straight up outscoring Amon-Ra. So I prefer the matchup with Amon-Ra, but at the same time with JSN, I don't think there's a bad matchup for him, period. Moving off of those two, I think pretty consensus, those should be the top 2 wide receivers in everyone's rankings, given what we've seen this year, given the consistency on a week-to-week basis. We head on to my next tier, my tier 2, which I classify as the other elite wide receiver ones. As we see, CeeDee Lamb at number 3, Drake London at number 4, and of course, Jamar Chase, who played on Thursday night, cracked in at number 5 on my list. But we'll start off at the top. CeeDee Lamb, I'm wearing his jersey for a reason. My first round, 2nd overall pick in the Flock League this year. And he is coming back to about as ideal of a game environment as you could possibly imagine. 55 game over-under in this, the highest of the entire slate. The Sharps are actually hammering the over as well, as we see the 5th highest rate of the Sharps on the over this week. On top of that, this is the 3rd highest projected pace, and CeeDee Lamb is coming back to an offense that has been the best offense in the league even without him. The way Dak Prescott has been playing, the amount of overall volume we have seen from this passing offense, CeeDee Lamb was averaging 19 points per game without a single touchdown in the first 2 weeks. We're hearing the report. CeeDee Lamb confirms that he will play this game with no limitations. We're not having to worry about a snap count. We're not having to worry about the ankle being an issue. In fact, CeeDee said himself he could have returned last week against Carolina if he needed to. So when we combine all of these factors, the game environment being so strong, CeeDee Lamb always being a threat to be the wide receiver 1 on the week, you can even argue him in tier 1, but for me, going to be a little cautious. Those two at the top, they've proven it all year. CeeDee Lamb, of course, still coming off of that ankle. But if we're getting CeeDee Lamb without limitation, I wouldn't even be shocked if he was number one on this list next week. So with CeeDee Lamb, he's back. Smash spot this week. Cowboys implied for a ton of points, which is why I love the higher on his 0.5 receiving plus rushing touchdown projection over on Underdog. We're smashing the higher there. CeeDee Lamb, let's get you into the end zone this week. Next up at 4 is Drake London. He's currently averaging 17.3 PPR points per game this year, but when you simply isolate for these last couple of weeks, we have seen him perform even better. The slot rate has gone up dramatically, and it's resulted in 20 plus PPR points in each of his last 2 games. With Drake London, we were already getting a 32% seasonal target share, but he has taken that up to the next level. We're talking about 26 targets and 268 receiving yards in his last 2 games. When you combine that with the 49ers right now, they're really banged up. They lose Fred Warner last week. They lose Nick Bosa a few weeks ago. This 49ers defense is not the unit that we thought it was coming into the season, and Drake London is playing like one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And if he has yet another 30+% target share game, we could be talking about a wide receiver 1 overall in the week threat. Number 5, Jamar Chase. I already talked about it, but he did play on Thursday night, and man, he's probably going to end up being the number 1 on the week. 23 targets. Joe Flacco, man. You are exactly what we needed for our Cincinnati pass catchers. We'll talk about T. Higgins later on, but I can't give enough good flowers for what we saw from Jamar Chase. 16 catches, 162 receiving yards. Like I said, over 38 PPR points. Man, if Jamar Chase is going to get this level of volume going forward, he is an elite, high-end number 1 wide receiver, and he will be in the S tier next week. But moving on to my 3rd tier, and I classify this as the other wide receiver 1. So as I mentioned at the top, these top 2, they are the 20-point per gamers. These next 3, the other elite wide receiver 1s. These are the other guys I'd feel confident in as my wide receiver 1 this week. Rome Odunze, Rashee Rice, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, and it rounds out as George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. But we'll start off the top. Rome Odunze in a high-profile spot against the Saints this week. And I get it. When you simply look at the box score last week, you would say, well, Rome Odunze, down week, Danny. How do you still have him at number 6? You have to contextualize that he had a touchdown called back in that game off of a Fugazi offensive penalty. And Caleb Williams missed him down the field a bunch of times. Like, we had a ton of opportunities down the field. Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze simply not on the same page. But we did see the usage, and we do know this is the clear number 1 on this team. On top of that, 4th best over-under of this entire slate. We got the Chicago Bears implied for over 26 points against the Saints. I think we're going to get him back on track. He's still the wide receiver 9 in points per game. He's still been a dominant wide receiver 1, but I think we see the return to the spike week for Rome Odunze. I'm talking 70+ receiving yards. I'm talking 1 or 2 touchdowns in this game. I think he gets over the line. Not to mention when you contextualize that DJ Moore hurts his groin on Monday, he will play. But how limited is he going to be? Is he going to play the usual allotment of snaps? Is he going to play 60 to 70% of the routes? I really do think this is a possibility. We see Rome Odunze have a 30 to 40% target share this week. Moving on to wide receiver 7, all I'm going to say is welcome back Rashee Rice. If you're rostering Rashee Rice, you probably already know this, but let's just say this guy was absolutely dominant in the first 3 games last year. In the first 3 games, when he was fully healthy, prior to going out in week 4 off of Mahomes' Dolphin dive, 21.3 PPR points per game. And even if you extend that to the final 8 games of his rookie season, that 11-game sample, he has been above 18 PPR points per game at 18.4. Rashee Rice, he's proven. He is the engine of this Chiefs passing offense, and Mahomes is playing the best football we've seen from him in the last few years. So if Mahomes is playing this well, we know Rashee Rice is the engine. Yes, sure, Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, they will merit their own volume. But as we know, Rashee Rice, when he's on the field, is the clear alpha of this team, and the Chiefs could not run the football for their life. On top of that, Raiders allowing the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year, and I expect the Chiefs to throw the ball across the yard. So give me the higher on Rashee Rice's receptions, 5.5. He smashes it higher this week, and he is the offensive fulcrum for this Chiefs offense right away. At number 8, we got Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings going to play the Philadelphia Eagles this week, and we've seen Justin Jefferson these last 2 weeks really take that expectation up a notch. 11 targets, over 120 receiving yards in each of his last 2 games. But the problem that I have with Justin Jefferson in relation to the other wide receivers here is that he does have a very tough matchup. He goes up against the Philadelphia Eagles, top 10 in defensive EPA per play against the pass. And this is one of the single worst game environments of the entire week. As we know, over under at 43.5, only the 10th highest of the slate. And Minnesota is implied for less than 21 points at home. So realistically, with JJ, he's talented enough to be able to get there on his own. But when you're dealing with this many talented wide receivers this week, he goes behind them based off the game environment. At number 9, Davante Adams. I'll keep it short and sweet. There's no Puka Nacua in this game, and there's the opportunity for Davante Adams to operate as the undisputed one for Matt Stafford and Sean McVay. The Rams are nearly implied for 24 points in London this week, and this is the second fastest projected pace of the entire weekend. Adams, he's been a top 12 to 15 guy this year, but with the opportunity for a potential 30 to 35% target share, he bumps into low-end wide receiver 1 territory. At number 10, we got Nico Collins of the Houston Texans, and when you look at the season in totality, 14 PPR points per game, not really what you wanted when you drafted Nico Collins. However, since week 2, that's all the way up at 16.1. He's still an absolute stud, but this is a difficult matchup and game environment for Houston this week. If only he got the Seahawks last week when their entire secondary was hurt, but Devon Witherspoon, Julian Love, and Tariq Woolen are all expected back for this game. And like I said, not a very good game environment to be able to deal with Nico. So again, with Collins, he's still elite. He's still capable of taking any target to the house. But this is not the smash spot that we would have wanted for him going into week 7. But George Pickens, on the other hand, absolutely has a smash spot. And obviously, I talked about his teammate, CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is the undisputed one on this team. CeeDee Lamb, for my money, will lead this team in targets on a week-in, week-out type of basis. But as we know with George Pickens, he showed his upside without CeeDee Lamb in the lineup. We saw wide receiver 4 in PPR points per game, and he was averaging nearly 120 receiving yards per game. Now we look over into his underdog fantasy projection. That is down at 61.5. So with George Pickens, I don't think he's going to be the high-end wide receiver 1 he's been without CeeDee Lamb. However, he's still a clear wide receiver 1 option in fantasy. This is a great game environment. Dak's probably going to throw, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns in this game. And George Pickens has been a touchdown magnet all year. But moving on to tier 4, we have the high-end wide receiver 2s. Courtland Sutton, Brian Thomas Jr., Tetairoa McMillan, and Ladd McConkey this week. We'll start off at the top. Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. And sure, he has had 2 duds this year, which really deflates his overall points per game. But even accounting for that, he's still at 13.9 points per game this season, and he is the wide receiver 18 on the year. On top of that, yes, sure, you do have the 2 dud games, but every other game this year, he has scored 17 plus PPR points. The Giants, they are more of a run funnel defense. They've actually been pretty good against the pass. But like I said, if you just take out those 2 dud weeks for Courtland Sutton, you get 19.7 points per game across the other 4 games. It is a riskier profile than other wide receivers in this range, but he has had 60 plus receiving yards and or a receiving touchdown in those other 4 games like I mentioned. At 13, we got Brian Thomas Jr. going up against the LA Rams this week. Obviously, I mentioned the London game. We have Davante Adams on the other side, Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Welcome back to being in this range, BTJ. 8 catches, 90 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown last week. On top of that, when you contextualize how big it could have been, he had another 50-plus yard touchdown called back by a Travis Hunter offsides. And sure, the Rams are a challenging matchup on the other side, but the issue with Brian Thomas Jr. was never the usage. The issue with Brian Thomas Jr. has been his own level of play. And we've definitely seen him take that step up in terms of his play these last few weeks. In his last 3 games, 15.2 PPR points per game. For reference, in his first 3 games this year, he was at only 8.5 points per game. I'll trust a large sample of him being an elite wide receiver rather than the 3-game stretch of him being average. At number 14, we have Tetairoa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers going up on the road to play the New York Jets. And he finally scored his first NFL touchdown of his career, something we called on last week's tier list. If you guys recall, last week's tier list, I said Tetairoa McMillan will score his first NFL touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys. Not only did he score his first, he also scored his second. With Tetairoa McMillan, the usage has been elite. 8+ targets in every game except for that game against the Cowboys. But like I said, he was able to supplement that with the touchdowns. And on top of that, the last 2 games, Bryce Young has been playing a lot better. Jalen Coker returns to the fold against the New York Jets. Potential shadow coverage from Sauce Gardner, but the Jets are still a bottom 5 defense in terms of defensive EPA per play against the pass. But moving on to wide receiver 15, we have Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers. Very, very good game environment this week. Ladd, he had his breakout in week 6, and this is the game environment we needed for him. 48.5 over-under. The Sharps are all over the over in this game, and this is the 5th highest projected pace game of the entire weekend. This is going to be a shootout. When we're talking about the Colts and Chargers, I would not be shocked if this was the highest scoring game of the entire weekend, like the over-under kind of implies. And with Ladd McConkey, he looks like he did at the end of last year. And despite QJ returning this week, I'm willing to give Ladd McConkey the benefit of the doubt because I do think he's arrived and the positive regression has finally hit. But moving on to tier number 5, we have the back-end wide receiver 2s. Quentin Johnson, Michael Pittman, DK Metcalf, of course, played on Thursday, Chris Olave, Xavier Worthy, Jalen Waddle, and Marvin Harrison Jr. And we start off at the top. I already talked about his teammate in the last section. But Quentin Johnson deserves his flowers. I think with Quentin Johnson, you do get the full practice this week. He is expected to return this week going up against the Indianapolis Colts. And I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt for being a mid-range wide receiver too. Because honestly, when he was fully healthy and operating, he was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. 17.3 PPR points per game this year. And as we know with Quentin Johnson, he's going to be in that low, 20 to 25% target share type of range, but he has big play upside. The frame, the ability after the catch, the ability working deep. He has meshed extremely well with Justin Herbert, so I don't want to take any credit away from him. He has been fantastic this year. I do prefer Ladd McConkey this week, but I also really love Quentin Johnson, my wide receiver 16. And on the flip side of the matchup, we have Michael Pittman Jr. He is a beneficiary of Josh Downs. Josh Downs, of course, in week 6, suffering that concussion. He is ruled out for this game. And with Michael Pittman Jr. getting 13.6 PPR points a game this year, and he has been a top 24 option in fantasy across the season. You're getting the elite game environment I've already talked about. And I expect a ton of the Colts passing volume to be concentrated between Tyler Warren and Michael Pittman Jr. this week. The Chargers, they have been good against the pass, but as we know with Michael Pittman Jr., elite touchdown equity. 4 receiving touchdowns in 6 games this year for a Colts team implied for nearly 24 on the road. At 18, DK Metcalf, like I said, already played. 5 targets, 3 catches, 50 yards, 0 touchdowns, 8 PPR points. And this is the DK Metcalf experience. I had him propped up because I'm like, you know what? Cincinnati, they're not the greatest overall team on defense. DK Metcalf, as we know, really thrives off of broken coverages. He didn't have a broken coverage this week, and he didn't have a touchdown. And this is what you got. 3 catches for 50 yards. This is the DK Metcalf experience. You're not going to get week in, week out type of wide receiver 2 production. You're getting a touchdown or bust option that you pray can make a broken play work. And the opposite of DK Metcalf is Chris Olave, because with Chris Olave, he's got the exact opposite issue. DK Metcalf, consistent involvement isn't there. He is averaging less than 6 targets per game this year. Chris Olave, complete inverse. He's gotten over 10 targets in every single game this year, and he has been between 10 to 16 PPR points in every single game. He's not got that 20-plus point upside, but he's also not going to kill you with 3 points in your lineup. You know exactly what you're getting with Chris Olave. Super safe, super steady PPR option. Like I said, though, he's just never going to win you the week. Like wide receiver 20, wide receiver 21. He's my wide receiver 19 this week. Like this is the range he's always going to be in as long as he is on the New Orleans Saints and as long as he is not scoring a ton of touchdowns like he hasn't been. Coming in at wide receiver 20, we have Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, going up against the Raiders like I mentioned with Rashee Rice. And Rashee Rice is the reason why he's this low, because Rashee Rice, I expect Rice to operate as the true wide receiver 1 of this team. But with Xavier Worthy, he's still a very strong wide receiver 2 option. 13 points per game since he returned from his shoulder injury, and we can finally see him being used in more of that downfield type of role against a Raiders defense that has seeded big plays all year. Like I mentioned, 7th worst in terms of defensive EPA against the pass, and with Mahomes playing at an MVP level, I trust more than one wide receiver option as a top 20 guy this week. A wide receiver 21, we have Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins going up to play the Cleveland Browns this week. There is a big elephant in the room for this game. Jalen Waddle, I would want to have him a lot higher than this. Probably, top 12, top 14, top 15 level on the week. But the issue here is that this game has a 99% chance of rain and a 40 to 70% chance of 46 plus miles per hour wind gusts. So if you had a quarterback, if you had a Josh Allen, a Justin Herbert, one of these aliens with rocket arms where the weather's not going to impact them, sure, you don't really falter the expectation. But when you have Tua Tagovailoa, who has arguably one of the, bottom 5, bottom 10 weakest arms in the league, I do have my question marks for what the throw velocity is going to look like. Is the big play going to be there? Can Tua even make those throws down the field? if Jalen Waddle is going to get there this week, it's going to be on the back of, like Wan'Dale Robinson type of usage. He's going to run a lot of drag, slants, get the ball in space, maybe potentially be used in the yak game. But I really do feel like the big plays are going to be limited, not only by the overall weather, but also by this Cleveland Browns defense. So give me the lower on his 11.75 fantasy point projection. And finally at 22, we got Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals going to play the Green Bay Packers. And this was a surprise, man. Nobody and their mother midweek would have expected Marvin Harrison Jr. to clear concussion protocol in 5 days. But sure enough, he did it. He's going to be playing in this game. And I truly think we were on the verge of a breakout for Marvin Harrison Jr. prior to him suffering a concussion. And the 23% of snaps that he played prior to the concussion last week, you had 2 catches for 32 receiving yards, and that came off the back of 2 straight impressive performances in weeks 4 and week 5. With Marvin Harrison Jr., I truly think the light was switched. He scored that touchdown against Seattle. You could see all of that mental burden really lifted off of him, and I think we get a better product moving forward. The only issue here, Jacoby Brissett's going to start. Very, very low implied total from Arizona this week. So while I do believe in the player, I also think the game environment is extremely volatile. On to my high-end wide receiver 3s. We got A.J. Brown, Kendrick Bourne, Stephon Diggs, Jordan Addison, and the pair of Buccaneers wide receivers. Again, I told you at the top, I'll talk about them later in the video. This is where I landed upon them given their questionable status. But we'll start off the top with A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles going to play the Minnesota Vikings. And, I mean, I don't know what to do with A.J. Brown because on one hand, we finally saw that other sign of life. With A.J. Brown, he had a big-time game on Thursday after 4 of 5 games finishing outside of the top 40 wide receivers. And it's a crazy phenomenon. Like, if you were to tell me coming into the year, A.J. Brown, elite wide receiver talent, arguably, top 5, top 6 level talent in the league, that he would have a 20+% target share in all but one game, I would have been expecting him to crush. But with A.J. Brown, it has been quite the opposite. There's a lot of turmoil right now, a lot of bad vibes coming out of that Philly locker room, starting with A.J. Brown. So with A.J. Brown, when you combine that with the fact that this is the single stingiest defense against the pass this year, the Minnesota Vikings, they do not allow big plays. In fact, they make big plays on their own right. I just have bad vibes. A.J. Brown, you have to put him in your lineup. He's way too involved not to because we saw last week, even despite the turmoil, he can still get there. But we're talking about an extremely low floor because that's the exact evidence we've had of A.J. Brown all year. Next up, Kendrick Bourne. And honestly, now that I'm looking at it, gun in my head, I think I would actually put Kendrick Bourne above A.J. Brown. So we'll make that change. A.J. Brown, you're at 24. Kendrick Bourne, you were at 23. And I never thought pre-NFL season me would have ever said that, but with Kendrick Bourne, he has earned that type of label. With Jawan Jennings, he's been playing with 5 broken ribs. George Kittle, he's going to come back this week, but he's coming off of a fully torn hamstring. And on top of that, Kendrick Bourne, we got a little bit of narrative here. With Kendrick Bourne, he is Mac Jones' best friend, and Mac Jones has peppered him in these last 2 weeks. 20 targets, 140+ receiving yards in each of the last 2 games. If he keeps playing like this and the 49ers are going to continue to be this banged up a wide receiver, I think he's an every week lineup staple. Moving on to wide receiver 25, we have Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots, 24.5 implied Patriots points this week. And with Stephon Diggs, you have gotten a 32% target share in his last 3 games. The issue right now, he's still not getting the full allotment of routes. He's played less than 80% of the routes in each of his last 2 weeks after peaking at 82 3 weeks ago. But it's going to be a process. He's still an older wide receiver coming off the ACL tear, but when he is on the field, it is very clear. He is the number 1 wide receiver in this team, and if we do see the routes improve going forward, he has mid-wide receiver 2 upside. At 26, we got Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Pretty simple here. In the 2 games we've seen him this year after the suspension, he scored over 15 points in each of those games. It is a difficult matchup on surface level, but with Jordan Addison, 14 targets, 155 receiving yards since returning, and as we know with Addison, he is a source for big plays on this Vikings offense. Quinyon Mitchell, probably going to spend a lot of time on Justin Jefferson. Maybe we get a squeaky wheel performance from Jordan Addison. And then I'll group the Tampa Bay wide receivers together because they are both questionable entering this game. We do have kind of the input right now that Mike Evans is more likely to play than Emeka Egbuka. But at the same time, man, they are both risks because obviously both of them dealing with hamstring injuries. With Mike Evans, you have the old factor here, older wide receiver trying to rush back. Maybe he potentially re-injures it. Emeka Egbuka suffered his hamstring injury last week, so he's inherently going to be at big risk to potentially re-injure it as well. I think they're too good enough to leave out of your lineup, especially in a game environment, pass funnel Lions defense, high-scoring game. I just have my pauses, man. make sure if you are going to have Emeka Egbuka, if you're going to have Mike Evans in your lineup, that you have a Tez Johnson, that you have a Cameron Johnson, maybe a Cade Otton, a Sterling Shepard, any type of pivot option that you can have for Monday night. Just make sure you ensure yourself so you don't get a 0 in your lineup if either are inactive this week. But moving on to tier number 7, we got a 29 Romeo Doubs, 30 Devontae Smith, 31 Keenan Allen, 32 T. Higgins, 33 Jordan Whittington, and 34 Jameson Williams. At 29 Romeo Doubs, he has operated as the Packers wide receiver 1 this season, and in particular in these last 2 games, you see the route share, you see the overall target rate. He is the clear number 1 in this order right now. I do think potentially we could see Matthew Golden usurp him in the coming weeks, but I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He is the X wide receiver. He's the number 1 for Jordan Love. The only issue could potentially be passing volume in this game, but Romeo Doubs has been a very, very strong wide receiver option, top 30 level option in your lineup, so that's exactly what he ranks for me this week. But moving on to 30, Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, I mentioned how bad the matchup is going up against Minnesota, the toughest defense against the pass this year, but at the same time, Devontae Smith has actually played better than A.J. Brown across the season. You can very well make the case, just player for player, Devontae Smith has been the better wide receiver than A.J. Brown. The issue, A.J. Brown is still getting the number 1 share of volume. So with A.J. Brown, if he's going to be eaten potentially in this game, I just don't see this Eagles passing offense supplementing 2 strong wide receiver performances against this Vikings defense. At 31, we got Keenan Allen, and this is a far cry from where we had him earlier in the season. Weeks 1 to 3, we're talking about one of potentially the league winners in fantasy. Wide receiver 10, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 12 in that 3-game stretch. Since then, in the last 3 games, he has not finished as a top 40 wide receiver. And I also am a little bit concerned with the fact that we haven't seen a single game for Keenan Allen with over 80% of the routes. On top of that, when Quentin Johnson missed last week, we saw a big-time influx of Trey Harris in the lineup. It wasn't Keenan Allen playing in 2 wide receiver sets. It was Trey Harris taking the mantle and taking the X wide receiver spot with Quentin Johnson out. I really do think maybe potentially moving forward with how well Trey Harris played, with how well he looked in that game, we start to see more mixed 11 personnel usages. Could we see a Quentin Johnson at the X, Trey Harris at the Z with Ladd McConkey in the slot type of lineup? Because right now, if Keenan Allen is going to be the backup slot wide receiver to Ladd McConkey and 3 wide receiver sets, he's going to be losing a ton of value moving forward. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I still think he's going to be starting over Trey Harris, but keep in mind for the long term, that is the risk with Keenan Allen if he loses snaps to Harris specifically. 32 T. Higgins, I'll just say it right now, I was wrong to have him this low. Over 20 PPR points, 10 targets, 6 catches, 96 receiving yards. The issue that I had was that as we saw with the offense as it was constructed, with Jake Browning, it simply was not moving the football. With T. Higgins, he hadn't had a game with over 60 receiving yards. Both those things came crashing down with how well Joe Flacco played on Thursday, and I'm going to be adjusting. T. Higgins, top 25-ish level wide receiver moving forward, and if Flacco keeps playing like this, you could be talking about a mid-range wide receiver too. Wide receiver 33, we got Jordan Whittington of the LA Rams, and simple here as well. Puka Nacua, he was ruled out in this game, and we saw Jordan Whittington assume 92% of the snaps in relief for Puka Nacua last week. And we do have a little bit of a sample size. In 2024, the 2 games that Jordan Whittington played without Puka in the lineup, we saw him cross over 12 PPR points and 22+% of the targets in each of those 2 games. He went over 60 yards in both of those games, which is why I love the higher on his 42.5 receiving yard projection over on Underdog this week. Final pick'em entry of our 4-part flex that we'll talk about at the end here. And then finally at 34, Jameson Williams going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Keep it brief here as well. The target involvement hasn't been there, less than 5 targets per game. But as I said with Jameson Williams, he is the definition of a ceiling raiser. We've seen the couple spike weeks, 18 PPR points in 2 games this year. And Tampa Bay, as we know, is a big-time pass funnel defense. High implied total for the Lions as always. Jameson Williams, he's either going to give you a big play and score a touchdown and you're going to feel great about him in your lineup, or he's going to give you that 1 catch for 7 yards, 2 catches for 13-yard type of performance, given the lack of involvement this year compared to last year we've seen in the offense. But moving on to the flexes, and we will run through this tier quickly. Matthew Golden, Wan'Dale Robinson, Trey Tucker, Rashid Shaheed, Travis Hunter, and Alec Iomanner consist of that tier this week. Starting with Matthew Golden at 35, the routes and target share still indicate, a big-time boom-bust level player, but the booms have happened a lot more recently, and as we know with a rookie, they can exponentially increase their role if they continue to play well, and I think Matthew Golden is exactly that case. When Matthew Golden's on the field, he's been making plays at all 3 levels, and we have seen it on display. Over 30% of the team air yards in 3 straight games, and as a high upside flex for a 25 implied point offense, I think Matthew Golden can get there. I do view Romeo Doubs as the one, but I think Matthew Golden can usurp him in the next coming weeks. Wan'Dale Robinson, very simple. He got there against Philadelphia, but Denver is a horrible matchup for him. There's no Darius Slayton yet again, and as we know, Pat Surtain exists on the other side. And with Wan'Dale Robinson against this Broncos defense, more than likely we won't get the coverage bust we saw him pay off with last week. So with Wan'Dale Robinson, he's fine. He's going to get targets. He's going to operate as the one on this team, but I don't think he's going to have the big play upside like we saw last week. 37 Trey Tucker, and based off his points per game, you think, oh, well, Danny, why do you not have him higher? He's averaging over 14 PPR points per game. Like, Trey Tucker, been one of the best picks in fantasy this year. Like, no. He had 40 points in one of those games, and when you isolate out that 40-point performance, he has averaged just over 9 points per game in his other games. And while I do think his overall PPR points per game on the season is fake, I also do have to acknowledge that in the last 2 weeks, he has been the #1 wide receiver for the Raiders, and he has operated at over 10 PPR points in each of the last 2 games. The issue, Michael Mayer, he is still the #1 target on this team. He is the first rate of this offense, and maybe we see potentially more Jack Besh, 75% of the snaps last week, with Jacoby Myers continuing to be banged up. 38 Rashid Shaheed, he has gotten 5+ targets in every single game this year, but the big plays just haven't come in bunches like last season. You just got to hope he kind of gets over the line, but at least this is a great game environment for Rashid Shaheed to be able to get it done. But coming in at wide receiver 39, we have Travis Hunter of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up to play the LA Rams this week. And with Travis Hunter, he played the most snaps on offense he's played of the year last week, and we saw 7 targets commanded. On top of that, Liam Cohen wants to feature him as the first read more often in the offense going forward. That all bodes well for Travis Hunter. He's volatile. He's definitely got a low floor, but I do think the ceiling still exists, especially if we see some more downfield looks. Now, wide receiver 40, we have Alec Iomanner of the Tennessee Titans going to play the New England Patriots this week, and this is a terrible game environment. Do not get it twisted. With Alec Iomanner, Tennessee Titans not implied for a ton of points. The Tennessee Titans overmatched on offense compared to the New England defense, but there is no Calvin Ridley this week, and maybe we see the vibe shift for this Titans offense. Obviously, they fire their coach. Clearly, the vibes are bad. Maybe we start to see Mike McCoy ignite the locker room. Again, there's not much here. Wide receiver 40 this week with the bye weeks, we're talking about complete dart throws. At least with Alec Iomanner compared to the other dart throws, you can bank on potentially A+ targets, especially with the upside that Cam Ward can improve. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. And like I mentioned in this video, my flex pick'em entry for this week on Underdog. We had the Jordan Whittington higher on his receiving yards. We had the Rashid Rice higher on his receptions. We had the Jalen Waddle lower on his fantasy points. And we had CeeDee Lamb to punch in a touchdown this week. Yeah, attach this 50% profit boost, and you can tailor fade my picks today, promo code FSE. The links are in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in week 7. Let's secure those W's. And for me personally, I'm hoping I can get to 5-2 in the Flock League.